We are so fortunate tonight. We have a panel of some of the most amazing human beings, and we have so much brain power up here that I don't know why I'm standing here. I'm going to let each one of these ladies introduce themselves to you because they know themselves better than I do. But I will introduce our moderator. We are so fortunate to have Kathy Conley, the Minority Floor Leader, as our moderator today. Now, of course, I have a few more things to say about her. Dr. Conley, note that Dr. Conley has taught at UW since 1992. She teaches women's studies and LGBT studies and a whole bunch of other stuff. Her research focuses on social stratification in institutions. Her work often has a practical bent with an eye towards social justice. She has published pieces that address issues in Wyoming, including the wage gap between men and women and gay rights. I will allow each panelist to introduce themselves, but I want to applaud this amazing group of women that we have. We're going to sort out what happens when coal is no longer king.
Okay.
Free it.
All right, the microphone is free. Well, good evening. Thank you all so much for being here. I have to tell you, I think Shannon asked me to moderate the panel back in August, and I can't say no to Shannon, right? I mean, know that you have an amazing attorney and government liaison down in Cheyenne when I'm serving in the legislature. And when she asked, I just had to say yes. Now, that was August. Now it's November. Shannon, you're in major trouble. But I also wanted to tell you that as an organization, and actually I was talking to one of your members earlier on, that your organization is one of my two go-to organizations when it comes to understanding issues about energy and property and using good science and best evidence. I trust what you tell me, and I think that that's something that you should all know. Yes, give yourself a hand. So I'll let each person introduce themselves just very briefly so you know just their names, and then I'll tell you how we'll organize the evening. Okay.
My name is Denise Parrish, and I am the Deputy Administrator at the Office of Consumer Advocate. There's 6 of us, and we are part of the Public Service Commission and we represent the public interest in utility matters of the state.
Thank you. Okay.
Hi everybody, I'm Adele Morris. I'm a Senior Fellow and the Policy Director for Climate and Energy Economics at the Brookings Institution. It's a policy research organization in Washington, D.C., and I'm very pleased to be with you tonight.
Good evening, I'm Robin Cooley, and I'm the Director of Workforce Services just since March of this year, so I'm kind of a newbie up here at the table.
Perfect.
I think you are all familiar with Workforce Services. We have a workforce center here in Sheridan. We have 20 of them across the state, so we really are an agency that are statewide, and we're doing everything we can workforce related. That's everything from workers' compensation, it's unemployment, it's OSHA, it's mine safety, it's voc rehab, it's employment and training in our workforce centers. It runs the gamut. So thank you for having me here tonight.
Okay. All right, so let me tell you how we're going to organize it, and I certainly hope a couple of you have pen and paper out, because just with the conversations that we've had at the table, it's going to rock and roll. Okay, so I have asked each of the panelists to talk for about 5 minutes using their own expertise. Okay, what have they researched? What do they know about the issues as it relates to coal in general, as well as the bankruptcies that we're experiencing in the state right now, and how to think about the future. Then I have some questions for each of the panelists. And we'll start with Adele, and then we'll go to Denise, and then we'll end with Robin. And then I have a series of questions for all of the panelists, so we can listen to how they think kind of together and bounce ideas off of each other, and then it will be your turn. Okay? Sound good? All right. So, for each panelist, you were each asked to participate based on some expertise that you bring to the question and our search for answers. So, Adele, I want you to start. Talk about your expertise in your current work. All right, tell us about the Brookings Institution. All right, speak about the specific issue of coal, the changing appetite for coal as an energy source, and the impact of that change on the economy. And finally, about the coal bankruptcies.
Okay, thank you very much. So my research, I'm an economist, and a lot of what I do is work with economic modeling teams, both our own and other modeling teams, to really try to understand the potential outcomes of energy policy and climate policy in the United States, both at the federal level, but also international agreements, and what might be the outcomes of state level policies. So what I'm going to talk about tonight is really grounded in this peer-reviewed literature to which I contribute, and then the other policy research that I do to try to address the outcomes that we see in the modeling. So what's going on with coal? Okay, so you guys are actually on the forefront in coal-reliant areas of what's really been a market-driven shift in the demand for coal. And what we know from the econometrics is that largely the decline in coal has been driven by low persistent natural gas prices. And this is, it's tempting to say, oh, was this regulation or that regulation? But the data actually say it's really a function so far largely of supply and demand and the substitutes for coal in the power sector. And that's largely the kind of coal that comes out of the Powder River Basin. And this is so I just recently co-chaired a study under the Stanford Energy Modeling Forum. We had 11 major models of general equilibrium models of the global economy and energy sector models. These are like the modelers from MIT and Stanford and all the other, usual suspects. And every last single model showed that even if the most modest climate policy would greatly amplify the trends away from coal. And there's for a couple reasons. One is coal is by far the most carbon intensive fuel. It's got twice as much carbon per unit energy of natural gas. And obviously natural gas has more carbon per unit energy of renewables. So if you do anything that prices carbon or the virtual equivalent, coal is by far the one that has the greatest relative price change. And second, coal has all these substitutes in its major market, which is the power sector, particularly for Powder River Basin coal. And so what happens is immediately, if you have a price on carbon or something similar in a regulatory vein, dispatch changes. So existing capacity in the power sector gets driven to lower carbon power plants. And that immediately disadvantages coal. And then what happens is those coal plants become economic because they're not running as much, and they get retired. And that capacity gets replaced with some combination of natural gas, which can be very efficient and clean, and renewables. And so there's some, I would say the models are less consistent about exactly what replaces coal, but every last one of them, coal disappears very short order, even with the most modest policy, because it's already on the tipping point. We're already seeing that decline. And so I think the exposure for the coal-reliant areas is really to be prepared for that kind of future. And so it's looking at that data that brings me here, because I'm kind of worried about the future of places like Wyoming and West Virginia that have relied on this resource for so long. Not just for jobs, but for the revenue streams that come with it. Your whole fiscal system is dependent on these mineral extractions and then what happens when that dries up. So that's why I'm actually doing a huge research project right now to think about, okay, well, if we're gonna have climate policy, how can Wyoming get in there and get a piece of the pie and make its future better? And so that's kind of what I'm trying to figure out. Like, what should Wyoming want out of this deal? What should they ask for? What should they get? And how do you build a better future while you're facing the inevitable? So that's kind of my whole area of research. And I can go on about this stuff, but I'm going to turn it over. But that's the theme of my research. And it's not fun to talk about. I don't like to talk about, this grim prognosis, but I feel like if I'm not doing it, I'm the one looking at the numbers all day. I don't know why you guys are going to want to do it. So, okay, I'm bringing it out there, and then maybe we can talk about it.
Okay. Thank you so much. And I want to tell you that I have read The Risk of Fiscal Collapse in Coal-Reliant Communities. I think it's an 80-page document, complete with charts and graphs. It is actually very well done, very interesting. And even though I joke around about the title of it, it is an accessible piece even for those of us without PhD in economics. But let me ask you, before I get to some of the more policy questions, just to be clear, what do you mean when you said that coal is going away in short order? Is short order 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, or 50 years? And what did you mean by a climate policy?
So short order is like within 5 years. So I'll just give you some modeling results. If the United States adopted a tax on carbon of about $25 per ton of CO2, which is about 23 cents per gallon of gas, really not that high, coal production from the Powder River Basin would decline by 95% in 5 years, according to the Department of Energy's own modeling. Okay, this is not even my modeling. So you got like 5 years of dwindling resource production and the revenue that goes with it. So that's what I mean by short order. Now you could say, all right, well, we're not going to have a carbon tax. Maybe we'll do something else. But any kind of regulatory program that is environmentally similar will do the exact same thing. It's just there won't have any revenue that we can then target back to coal country to ameliorate the dislocation. So, you can say, well, I don't want a carbon tax, but if you don't want that and you want regulation under Clean Air Act, you're going to get the same outcome with no resources to help you. So that's kind of like what I'm trying to think through is how does Wyoming and West Virginia manage its transition in a way that buffers that dislocation fiscally, employment-wise, and otherwise.
All right. You just begged the obvious next question. What should Wyoming do to be better prepared to adapt to the national, international, and state policy shifts?
Well, I think the first thing you have to be prepared for is to diversify both your revenue instruments. Like you have to have a broader set of taxes, but you have to have a broader set of economic activity that would actually raise revenue from those taxes. So you got to be prepared to, diversify into tourism or whatever. I mean, I'm going to defer to the community development experts here in Wyoming, but you got to be prepared to rely on things other than fossil fuel extraction. And you have to be prepared to get in there and get a deal. I think one of the things that worries me about Wyoming is that if you're just in a mode where you're saying, we're never going to have anything that looks like climate policy because we don't think climate is a problem, is not grappling with the reality is you don't control the outcome. Other states are the ones buying your coal. So you don't control, you can't hold a gun to their head and force them to buy coal. So policy's going to move on. So you got to be prepared to get in there and get the deal that you can. And okay, this is going to come out maybe harsh, but it's going to mean that Wyoming is like every other state that doesn't have fossil fuels, right? Like most states have not been able to rely on these resource rents for revenue for decades, and now you're going to be just like everybody else. So I'm sorry, you're going to have to talk about taxes and taxing your own selves, and it's going to be uncomfortable, and it's going to be a cultural shift, but it's just going to mean you're just like everybody else. And I don't know how sympathetic a lot of people are going to be about that.
All right, thank you so much. And we did try to impress on Adele at the table that this is going to take a little bit of work. But one of the things that I'd like to get back to maybe in a later question and answer is thinking about federal mineral royalties and the grand deal that Adele has in mind that maybe kind of we could start thinking about, with the federal government when it comes to those FMRs. But we're going to turn now to Denise. Denise, tell us more about your agency and in particular how you are thinking about coal and then the bankruptcies. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, and because this is such a difficult topic, and because I am a government employee for a couple of more months anyway, or maybe a couple more hours after this discussion tonight. So I want to do the usual disclaimer that these opinions are my own, even though they probably should be the opinions of others. The Public Service Commission regulates utilities, and the first mantra you learn is basically safe, adequate, and reliable service at affordable rates or reasonable rates. And so that's really what my whole job works around. The Office of Consumer Advocate is 6 people within the Public Service Commission that represents the public interest. That's the way the statute reads. We don't represent any particular customer group or individual customers, but just the general body of ratepayers within the state. A lot of what we do is economic. Of course, we're very interested in reliability, which goes along with that. So those are the 2 things that we really focus on in terms of utility rates, the economics of those utility rates, and are the lights going to stay on. And so my background is accounting, but I've been doing this 42 years, 28 of them in Wyoming. And I'm a kid that came from Detroit, and so it's a little bit of a culture shock to come to Wyoming and see the difference in thinking about things. A couple of things that I think about with coal is that of course what has been discussed around the state this last year is the Rocky Mountain Power studies that have come out, and I don't know how many of you are Rocky Mountain Power customers, electric customers, but they've been doing these studies for the last year that look at what the best set of resources for serving electricity in the state and in the region is. And it's a long-term study. It's a 20-year study with a focus on the first 3 to 5 years. And it shows that over the next 10 years, some of the Wyoming coal plants economically don't carry their weight, that they should be closed and replaced. Now that carries a lot of different ramifications for ratepayers, because those plants are not all paid for right now. And the company legally, the utilities legally have a right to be reimbursed for those kind of power plants. So when we're talking about this, when we look at the economics, we need to look at the economics not only of what the new resources are going to cost, but how do we continue to pay for those old resources that they have a legal right to be paid for. So that's one side of economics. The other thing is, our office does not set policy. We follow the policy of the legislature that's set. So we are not policy makers, we are policy followers. And so we're relatively indifferent. We are also not, and I've told this to the legislature and survived the discussion, We are not economic development people. Our job is very specific to represent ratepayers and look at the economics of utilities. And so if the legislature wants to set a policy that says electric customers pay for every road or school in the state, we'll make sure that happens. If you want to set a policy that says, part of the cost now needs to be community impact costs, we'll make that happen. But that's going to affect everybody in the state relative to their electric rates then. And you need to be aware of that. So I will stop with that and say that the one thing we need to remember really is a lot of the replacement power, if these coal plants close, is going to come from solar and wind and batteries. And that scale of solar, wind, and batteries in this state is pretty untested, and there's a lot of nervousness about the reliability of putting that much, that soon, that fast. I know there are studies that say it works and so forth, but implementing it makes people nervous. The last thing I'll say is that there is time to transition, and I am a huge believer. I am not personally or our office trying to save coal or stop coal. We are indifferent on that. But if the studies are showing what they're showing, that coal is going away, let's use this to transition. Let's not just say what we always say, oh my gosh, give us one more boom and we won't screw it up.
Great, thank you. Okay. So Denise, I want to ask you a couple of questions about coal and then some about wind and solar and a little bit about the bankruptcies in your office. So I am curious in general, what are the challenges that we need to address regarding kind of just even the coal plant retirements in relationship to the grid and for we as ratepayers in the state?
Well, we don't have a lot to do with the retirements of the coal mines. The one thing that does make us nervous is some of those power plants rely on one mine that's next to them, the one in Kemmer, particularly. And if that mine closes before they're ready to close the power plant, we have a problem. And so that's an issue. But generally, it's just going to be, is there another source of coal that's economic that can come in? So we have a lot less to directly worry about with the bankruptcies. In terms of the grid and reliability, that's what we're really nervous about, is that and what we have seen is there were a lot of people that were hoping these coal plants would all close right at once, because of environmental and carbon things. The studies have spaced it out. So some of them are likely to close in 23, some in 25, some in 28, some in 32. So we have some time to really address the transition, both in terms of cost, in terms of the Wyoming economy, and in terms of the grid. Because if we start to put a lot of wind, solar, and batteries in, and there's a problem, then there's still time to step back and say, let's see what we need to do now.
Okay, I think I only have time for one more. But Adele had mentioned that, the notion that we can kind of hold on to coal in part isn't borne out by the analysis that's done by the experts, in part because these other technologies, they're coming in fast. And so, Denise, you've talked a little bit and intimated that there could be some issues with having mass scale wind, maybe solar. What are some of those issues? And then can you talk just really briefly about localized options and what they mean?
Localized, power options? Okay,
Net
so.
metering.
Oh, net metering, okay. So, I mean, let me start with that one first, is that a lot of people are talking about if you put solar on your roof or a windmill in your backyard and you provide your own power or power to the grid. The legislature, the Corporations Committee is currently taking that up because there are questions about whether those people are being subsidized and that are doing that, and if in the long run, the rest of the ratepayers are paying more than they should for that. So that's a question that will be taken up by corporations and the legislature this year. Our economics show that we did some studies for Corporations Committee and they show that there is a subsidy right now the way the law is written, so that's being examined. I don't have a position on good or bad, I just think that it should be a fair payment to people that do that. In terms of reliability, the reliability comes really with the fact that solar is so cheap during the day, but then goes away as soon as it's dark. And so the wind usually is not blowing at the peak times. And so that's where the batteries are coming into play, and that's a new technology for us. I mean, the PacifiCorp is talking about putting in 3,000 megawatts of batteries, and right now they have a couple hundred on the system. So it's really a technology that hasn't been used very much in Wyoming, and we're just not sure. And especially with the very large industries that really want absolute no 1 second, 2 second, 10 second blip. It's something for us to really keep an eye on and watch.
Great, thank you so much. All right, we're gonna go down to
You wanna
Robin.
ask a question?
You wanna ask a question?
No.
Oh, no, thank you, okay.
Okay, I think I'm here at the table to talk to you about the human side of this discussion. I had the privilege of being in Gillette the day after Black Jill closed, and I want to tell you it was devastating. We had a meeting with the county commissioners, and there were a number of state entities that were there at the table, and it was very difficult to watch. The next day we had an informational meeting. We had over 250 people at that meeting, and it was devastating. And that's, I think with the studies and the science and that's important, but there's a human element to this that we all have to recognize. And I think that's my job at Workforce Services. And I have to tell you, I wake up every morning with this sense of urgency that I can't get loose of during the day, that we need to get something done and we need to get something done fast. As I indicated, we've got 20 workforce, we're across this state, and we've got what's called WIOA funds, Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act funds that we can help people with dislocated miners for. We've got support services, but part of the problem is our workforce centers are known as unemployment offices. So part of what we're trying to do is change that dynamic and make those 20 workforce centers, they're career offices. They're offices where you have lost a job, you're a dislocated worker, you're a voc rehab client, you're a youth out of school, whatever the case might be. That's where you go to look for reemployment and you look for help. So that is something that we're trying to change, a conversation that we're trying to change in order to help the miners and help anybody in Wyoming that is dislocated from their job or suffer some of these other circumstances. But I also want to say that we've all kind of, it was probably happening before I was there as well, but it's been a wake up to me to recognize that we can't sit back and just let things happen. We've got to be proactive. And so one of the things we did right after the closure of the Black Jewel mine, and I mean, we had people on the ground, and we had a number of unemployment claims, and we had wage issues, and we had HSA payments that weren't made. So one of the things we did was we started going back and debriefing. Okay, when this happens again, if it does happen again, or if we have a layoff that we even know about, what are we going to do and what are we going to do better? So we started a strategy plan. We've actually got a rapid response plan already in place, but we're working on that to better that plan. But we also went to our Department of Labor partners. In 2017, with the closure of some mines, we had actually applied for funding to help dislocated workers, miners, and those funds were granted, but they were only to specific mines in the state, so they could only help miners that were actually laid off from specific mines. So what we did is we went back to the Department of Labor and we said, hey, you know, we've got a situation in Wyoming. We need to have the ability on the fly to help miners from any of these mines that might be laid off. So we got them to amend that grant fund to allow us, it's for any mine now in Wyoming. We also got additional funding for that. So we've got the ability to assist, and we've got the ability to help, whether it's through the Power Grant funds, which is where the funds I was just talking about. We also applied for more apprenticeship funds that will help us get people actually into a job making money while they're also learning a skill, or we're looking at transferable skills. What skills do you have? And this is all taking place in those workforce career centers I talked about. What skills do you have that are transferable? We know we've got individuals in the Trona mines that are aging out. They have a retirement issue there, and they don't have people, skilled workers, to come into those mines. So we're starting to look at what are those transferable skills so we can help you into these other places. So we're being proactive as we do that. Another program we're looking at, and again, this comes from this sense of urgency that we've got now, that we need to get something done. We need to help these workers. We have a Wyoming Grown program, and in the past, it was initiated in 2015. In the past, what it was is we had parents and grandparents and friends applying to our Wyoming Grown individuals and asking, hey, you know, I've got this person that's out of state, they have this contact with Wyoming. Why don't you send a letter to them, see if they want to come back to Wyoming, see if they want to come back and find a job. So the governor would actually sign a personal letter, send it out to the individuals, see if we could get some people back. And we had some pretty good numbers initially. But what we're doing now is we're changing that up. We're not waiting for people to apply and have us go out and reach people. What we're doing is we're piloting with individual businesses around the state. We're saying, hey, you come to us and you tell us when you need a skilled worker in a particular area. And what we're going to do is we're going to reach out proactively through social media. We're going to reach out and grab these people that we know might have Wyoming contacts. We're going to tell them, we've got this business in this community and they want your skills. Are you willing to come back? And here's all the benefits that you might get from coming back. So what I'm saying is we're reaching out and trying to affect the human element of all of this. And we've got a lot of programs, we've got a lot of ideas, we've got some passionate people out there working on it. But I got to tell you, it's going to take all of us. And we've got all these entities out in the state doing some fantastic things around the state. But we've got a lot of people reinventing the wheel where they might not need to. So that's another issue. We've got to pull all these people together, and we've got to work toward this goal together. So we're not wasting resources reinventing the wheel when we can. That's already been done, so let's put that money towards this. So that's my spiel as far as the human element. It's very real out there, and we're trying to address it as best we can.
Great. And I'm going to go across you, if that's okay. Sure, yeah, okay.
Thanks, Robin, and I too certainly heard that the response in Gillette immediately with the abrupt closing of Black Jewel by your agency was pretty phenomenal, so thank you for that. But I want to just switch gears for just a second and ask about kind of new energy jobs. And new energy jobs often are with independent contractors. And we see that with some of these alternative energy that could be coming in. And those jobs often do not come with benefits, unlike the jobs that go with the coal industry. And so I'm curious if you and your agency have thought some about the impact of having independent contractors without health insurance, without retirement, things like that.
Thank you, that's a great question, and that was actually some of the main issues that we heard from the miners that were asked to go home from the Black Jewel. What are they gonna do for health insurance? What are they gonna do for retirement? They couldn't access. I talked to one gentleman, his retirement account, he could have gotten into that to help him out during this time frame. He couldn't access it because they were frozen. Unfortunately, because the funds that we get through the WIOA account, or through our WIOA funds, they don't pay insurance costs. They don't pay mortgage costs. But what they will do is help pay some medical costs. So I was recently, I think, misquoted in the newspaper saying that we can pay health insurance. We can't pay health insurance. We have to be very careful with how we use those federal funds, because we risk losing them if we don't do it correctly. We can't pay retirement benefits. We can't do any of that. So that's going to be a struggle, and it's going to be a struggle for a lot of folks in Wyoming, because I'm currently working with another legislator on financial literacy, and asking our agency to go around the state with some financial literacy education, because we've got an aging population in Wyoming, and I just spoke about it as far as the trona industry goes. We've got individuals that haven't saved enough in Wyoming, and there's going to be a huge monetary cost to Wyoming from that. So if we can help with that and go around with a little bit of financial planning, a little bit of financial education to help people start thinking about that now instead of later, I think that's something we can look at. But one thing that we learned from the closure, we had the Department of Insurance on site, and I want to reach out and really give them a shout out, talking about COBRA. Now, certainly COBRA is only an option there if you currently had health insurance and then you were released, and it's an option because that COBRA plan or that health insurance plan goes forward. That wasn't the case with the mine closure at Black Jewel, so that wasn't an option. But what the Department of Insurance was able to do is they got with HHS, and they had HHS extend that market time frame where you were able to get into the market and sign on to some of those insurance plans through the marketplace. So that was, I think, a real benefit, but that's another option. But we have not come up with a good answer to those types of insurance and retirement benefit issues that we know are coming up, that we are already seeing. So.
Thank you, and I'm just going to put a plug in. We have to go back to talking about Medicaid expansion and what could possibly happen in this state. All right.
Can I add something? One thing on that?
I'm just going to add one thing on that. We spoke to Kansas as it related to this very issue. They gave us some incredible numbers that they saved when something like this happened to them. They had Medicaid expansion in place, and the numbers were phenomenal of the amount of money that it saved their state. So I'm just going to throw that out there.
Okay. And honestly, as a member of the Revenue Committee, we'll be taking up that issue in 2 weeks. Fingers crossed. All right, so now I'm going to turn and ask questions for all of the panelists to address together, so we can get some conversation going on among them. So let's start with the biggie. So we're here in Wyoming, and there's tension between wanting to keep coal and the corresponding jobs and revenue, and the need to start thinking about an economic transition for lots of reasons. Many people want both. And that's honestly what we hear most of the time, is we want both. So the question is, can our state move forward with a serious conversation on economic transition and diversification while still holding out hope for coal? And I want to start with Adele.
Sure. Yeah. So I think what you want is irrelevant to the market forces that you're facing. And I know that sounds really harsh, but you guys, 90+% of the coal produced in Wyoming is not used in Wyoming. You have no control over those factors. And that's an existing policy environment. And if there's a climate policy of any kind, it's going to be even more dramatic. So want whatever you want, but be ready to deal with the realities. This is why I will never get elected to anything. But you can be focused on, finding the resources, demanding the resources to do what Robin's already talking about times 10. Like, my thought for Wyoming is you should have easily 10 times the resources that you have now. So then you can be dealing with, well, what's going to happen with these mines to be reclaimed when the companies go bankrupt, right? You're going to have a huge liability in your lap. What's happening with the healthcare and pension? Why not have a deal that backfills all of that and gives early retirement to the people who need it? What about the lost tax liabilities of state and local governments when they have to get in line in bankruptcy court? How are they supposed to refill their pockets that they were due long since? But because the coal companies are extremely sophisticated about their bankruptcy and they know how to work the system, the local jurisdictions are left trying to go up against those guys in court, and it's not easy. And then doing all the workforce development and all those things that Robin was talking about. But then there's the water quality issues and, black lung and all of that stuff. And so my view is like, okay, if coal's going down, make it go down in your favor somehow. And I've got lots of ideas of how to do that. I mean, I know that's probably not a welcome message, but if you don't play in that policy process starting now, you're going to lose and you're going to get nothing at the end of the day. So my own advice to Wyoming legislators is to say, get ahead of this. I mean, you're already behind. You're not going to get ahead, but get more ahead than you are now and get sophisticated about, getting in there in DC and getting your piece of the pie, because you have a hugely compelling story. Like everything Robin just said, illustrates all the needs. And I think, the people I talk to who are worried about the climate challenge would gladly make this deal with states like Wyoming to make that happen. And you all could end up being better off than you were before. That's my sense of the data.
All right.
So just to add on to where Adele started, is that my one fact and figure that I was sent with from my office was that the coal mined in Wyoming was 288 million tons. 26 million of that was burned in Wyoming coal plants, and we get about 15% of that for our own use. So we're talking about 2% of the coal mined here actually under or being used for Wyoming citizens, and that's not going to save a mine. The question is one of will. We were talking before dinner, the four of us were talking before dinner, and I made a comment that, I think we're in the grieving stage, if you go through the 5 stages of emotion. And one of my fellow panelists said, maybe we're not there yet, we're in denial. And so, I really think that it's a bit of a problem to keep looking back. I think, people want to This is the part where I'm gonna get fired tonight, but anyway, it's a bit of a challenge to keep looking back, and to try to look forward at the same time. So I think that yes, of course, if you want to try to save coal, you can try to do that while you transition, but I think you lose focus. I think you divert your attention to too many different things. And so my suggestion, if anybody were to ask me, would be to say, let's use this time. We've still got coal mines and coal plants in Wyoming for the next 12, 15 years. Let's take the transition time and not muck it up. Is that let's focus on what we can do. Whether it's to instead of trying to save coal, it's trying to bring some other resource in, whether it's to do some other economic development, whether it's to draw other types of businesses in, whatever it may be, is that we have to have the will to change. And to me, that's the hardest part that we have with Wyoming leadership right now, is that they're so ingrained in trying to save something that's unsavable at this point, that we need somebody to step up and provide a dose of reality.
You want to add?
So I told these ladies, I think I'm the Pollyanna of the group. I'm the ultimate optimist, and I think, yes, we have a certain timeline, but I think we can do it within that timeline, and I think we can do it with a step-down type of process where we're coming into it, and we're coming. Change is hard for people, and this is a sea change. This is a sea change for the people that are in this industry, that have thought that they were going to be in that industry for the rest of their lives. And that is a difficult thing to ask of them, and I think we all have to recognize that. We have to deal with that. We have to help them come around to the fact, and that's, whether that's through offering the education. We've got so many opportunities out there for re-education and retraining and just complete career changes. We've had money spent on helping a miner go and get his real estate license. We had 2 individuals go to nursing school. So this is going to be a process, and I think we have to recognize that, and we have to appreciate the fact that it's going to take some time. And like I say, I have this sense of urgency. Maybe we don't have that time, but on the flip side, we're going to have to recognize it's going to take some thought changing and thought process. So.
Yeah, great, thank you.
Thank you. All right. I'm going to switch gears a little bit. And, when I looked at the panelists and knew what they would bring to the table, I was really impressed with their level of knowledge, their expertise, their experience. But we live in a world often right now where that knowledge and expertise is often dismissed, right? Mm-hmm. It's science, economic projections, best practices can be thrown out the window in a nanosecond. And so I was curious if each of the panelists would address that reality and how they think about it.
Their heads are down.
Well, I'll comment a little bit. So a lot of what I'm seeing in my analysis is really uncomfortable trajectories and projections. But I've kind of been surprised. Like, I presented some of I haven't shown you slides and graphs and tables and stuff. But I've done these presentations, like I did one in West Virginia, showing really kind of grim numbers. And I was ready. I couldn't even sleep the night before I gave that presentation because I was so nervous what the reception would be to that work. And I have to say the response was remarkably open-minded, and it sort of confirmed what some of the concerns already were in West Virginia. And it turned out, fortunate for me, I wasn't the only person on the set of panels who was kind of saying more or less the same thing. And since I've been here in Wyoming, I'm kind of getting a similar sense that, like, maybe you guys aren't representative audience or anything, but I will say that there is a really remarkable openness or open window to thinking about these things in a new way, because I think there's a growing recognition that, maybe you guys, there'll be some technological development that kind of saves it all, but there seems to me to be more openness to consider the alternative and more recognition that there is an urgency to prepare for that alternative future and make it as positive as it can be for Wyoming. And I think that gives me a lot of hope, because that open-mindedness lets new ideas and policies in the door, and that can only be a good thing.
All right, here we go.
Well, you can't force people to listen to you, but eventually reality sneaks up and hits you on the behind. So, I think we're sort of in that stage with state revenues, is that, that mother is the necessity is the mother of invention. And so I think we're being forced to, whether we want to or not, whether we believe that this is a long-term or a short-term problem, we're being forced to start the conversation. I don't have much more to say, because people start to have their minds made up, but when they see their neighbors and Robin, I do feel for you. I was in Kenner when people were told what the latest plan for the power plants and the mines were, and so they see it. Is that I feel for you, and it is personal in this state, and so I don't want to come off cold-hearted, but I think at some point, it's just so overwhelming you can't help but say, okay, now what?
Okay. And Robin?
So before this job, a couple jobs previous to that, I was on the State Board of Equalization, and I was looking at Wyoming's mineral taxation laws and the conversations that were going on at that time. And then I went to the PSC and was listening to those conversations on the Public Service Commission and reading the IRPs that were submitted, and looking at what was coming. And so now I'm still reading the paper, reading it from a little bit different viewpoint, and I think the conversation is changing. I think that people are coming to, it's a change, it's a process. I think that people, whatever they believe, if they believe the science or not, they certainly believe the markets, and they certainly believe what's going on in the markets. So regardless of the science, the change is there, and the change is happening, and I think the conversation is changing to recognize that. And regardless of what the cause is, I think that movement is starting to happen.
Okay.
All right, so my last question before we open it up to you is, if each of you could give one piece of advice to the governor and legislative leadership, what would it be?
Look forward. Wyoming has changed over the years. We used to have coal furnaces. We used to have trains that ran on coal. We have a lot of ghost towns in this town. My husband sitting there is a history buff, and he'll tell me this crossing the road used to be 1,000 people. Things change. We don't make buggy whips anymore, and so look forward. Let's reinvent ourselves. You know, we have a great state. We have fantastic resources. I every time I go to Thermopolis, I wonder why I'm the only one there. You know, it's the Wind Rivers are some of my favorite places. It's you know, let's reinvent ourselves.
So I would say to the governor and the governor's folks is to just be super careful of wishful thinking. And, you know, you can be hopeful, but that doesn't necessarily have to be your central strategy. Be strategic and, you know, prepare for the most likely outcomes, even as though you hope for better outcomes. And try to make investments that give you lots of information about what might work and what wouldn't, so that, you know, that next time you make an investment, it pays off even better. So a lot of it's just playing good government, good revenue administration, and be in there and be as strategic as possible, both within Wyoming and with Wyoming's relationship to the federal government.
Yeah. You're the stand-up economist. I just teased her. She's funny. So she can do stand-up as an economist, don't you think?
Not that we'd vote for her.
No, of course not. I hope not.
I'm in a little different situation as a member of the governor's cabinet, so I'm going to just rely on what I've already heard the governor saying. But it's something that I completely agree on or agree with, and it kind of is a broader picture than what we're talking about here tonight, and that is, as we look at how we're moving forward, retaining and maintaining a skilled workforce is going to be critical going into the future. You've all heard the discussions about the brain drain. We've got some incredible individuals at the University of Wyoming that are getting an incredible education, and the minute they walk across the stage and get the degree, they're heading out of state. We've got to be looking at why that's happening and what we can do to stop that kind of a brain drain. As well, we've also got an aging population. I just alluded to that earlier. We've got to deal with that issue, and we've got to address it. So we've also got a number of federal overlay to the work that we do that doesn't recognize it's a one-stop or one-fits-all kind of legislation, federal legislation that doesn't fit our state. And I think that we've got to have congressional leaders that are recognizing that and helping us to fit that, to fit Wyoming and some of our rural long distances. So I think that it's more, I would look at it as a broader, big picture of retaining and maintaining the skilled workforce that we need in Wyoming in order to grow some of the business and get the diversity we've been talking about tonight.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. And let's give all our panelists a round of applause before we open it up for questions for you. Thank you.